Rachel Holt for NESN.com here with Adam Rank of NFL Media. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Oh, a pleasure is always on this side of the phone.
Well, Adam, you're on the show Fantasy and Friends on NFL Network, and you're also big on Twitter. You have over 100,000 followers. I'm telling you all this just in case you didn't already know. And part of the reason for that you have so many followers is because you actually take the time to listen to them and answer questions. You're a nice guy on Twitter, so my question for you leading into week 6 is, what is the biggest question you're getting from fantasy owners so far?
You know, I think a lot of people still have concerns at the quarterback position because a lot of people have doubled up on quarterbacks. I think if you have a running back who is actually somewhat serviceable, you can go out there and go ahead and play them. But usually, you know, everybody wants to know which quarterback, especially when Phillip Rivers plays a tough matchup on Thursday night against the Broncos or anything like that. People want to know if Matt Ryan is for real this week. Can you trust him against the Seahawks? What was the status of Cam Newton? So it usually comes down to the quarterbacks, although you do see some weird ones. And I do think that at times people just like to humble brag and be like, look how awesome my team is. I have so many great players. I don't know who to pick. And I tell those people, I don't have time for you. I'm starting – who's the curtain jerker I'm starting this week? Because I've got some teams that are like – I have 2 teams that have been besieged by injuries where you're like – this is awful. Like, this might be the week that you just kind of move that to the bottom of the priority list.
They like to brag. I understand that. Let's talk week 6. 2 teams are on byes this week, the Vikings and the Bucks. So it's a little easier on fantasy owners than last week when we had 4 teams on byes. We're also nearing the halfway point. It's hard to believe for some fantasy football leagues, depending on when your playoffs are. So it's kind of crunch time for a lot of people. I want to talk with returning players. We're getting some guys back this week who are big names. First off, Carolina Panthers running back Jonathan Stewart is one of them. He's expected to return following his hamstring injury, and he'll potentially have his quarterback too. Cam Newton should return after being in concussion protocol. We're not entirely sure yet. So my first question to you is, how does Stewart's return affect the rest of the guys we've been playing in Carolina, like Cameron Artis-Payne and Fozzie Whitaker? And 2, if you have Cam Newton and he is playing, do you start him, or are you still cautious about how he's going to do?
Well, I think with Jonathan Stewart, you would normally want to rest, or not rest, like you're resting a guy. You would normally want to just wait and see and how he's going to respond to his injury and everything like that. But the matchup against the Saints is pretty good to where you would probably go out and get him into your lineup. And I again, going back to some of my teams, I'm starting Wendell Smallwood. I'm not. Actually, I'm not. I'm joking. But I have him on one of my rosters. Like, that's how deep it is. So it's like I can get a player like Jonathan Stewart back. I'm happy to get him in the lineup this week. And hopefully he can continue to be productive. I wouldn't necessarily jettison Cameron Artis. It's hard to say. I mean, without seeing somebody's roster, like normally you wouldn't want to get rid of somebody, a backup or a handcuff, when you have a guy who's battling a hamstring injury like Jonathan Stewart, because they're so easy to flare up. But, you know, if you need to make some space, I understand it. Fozzie Whitaker's absolutely droppable at this point. But the big question is Cam Newton, and everybody wants to know what to do with him. I say, again, you know, he's such a great player, and you probably drafted him earlier than you would have liked. And even though he struggled a little bit over the last couple of weeks before the injury, you still got to play him. If you look at what he was able to do against the Saints last season, this is a very favorable matchup for him. I mean, he torched them for a lot of yards, a lot of points, a lot of touchdowns. So if he's back and you've got him you got him on your roster, I say, unless you've got Tom Brady starting over him, you got to get him into your deal there.
Thank you for putting that little Tom Brady plug in there. We appreciate that.
I have to mention Tom Brady every time I come on here, so I want to make sure that I'm telling everybody, continue to play Tom Brady. Although I'm going against Tom Brady in a league, so if I can ask this favor.
Yes.
I want the Patriots to beat the Bengals by like 40. That's fine. I just want LeGarrette Blount to get all the touchdowns. I want Tom Brady to hand it off 5 times. LeGarrette Blount gets a bunch. Tom Brady has a great game. Looks, handsome and does whatever he does, but he's got like 10 fantasy points while your team wins. I don't think that's too much for me to ask.
That's a good compromise. Patriots fans will still be happy. While we're on the subject of Patriots over here, let's talk about your Bears for a second.
Why?
Well, their record may not reflect it. I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just pointing out a fact. But if you have a couple Bears players on your fantasy team last week, you actually did pretty good. You had some good points. First,
Don't
Brian
sound so
Hoyer.
surprised.
It's not a surprise. I didn't mean to just have that inflection. It just happened naturally. But Brian Hoyer, I was actually surprised because I started him in one of my leagues where Drew Brees was sitting out on his bye week. And he was great for me. He threw for nearly 400 yards last week, and he's been solid the past 3 weeks in a row. So is this a guy that's a good option at QB?
Well, Rachel, we did talk about him last week on the show. We both picked him up and started him. I started him in most of my leagues. There was one league where I just was like, you know what, I'm going to try to go back to Matthew Stafford and see what happens. And so either way it worked. And what we've seen out of Brian Hoyer, though, as you said, over his 3 starts, he's averaged more than 300 passing yards. He's averaged 2 touchdowns a game, and he's not turning the ball over. And so it makes perfect sense that the Bears are going to do the smart thing here. Going to let him start for as long that he continues to be productive and not turn the ball over. And I'm sorry, Jay Cutler, whenever you get back, it's just not going to work out for you. You're going to have to sit the bench. This week, though, when you look at the matchup against Jacksonville, and I know everybody likes to make jokes about Jacksonville, and I understand, it's cool. You guys are New England. You guys win everything, so you don't understand the plight of the poor fan down in Duval County, Florida. But
no idea. Sorry.
You got to understand, Jacksonville has been pretty tough on some Hall of Fame quarterbacks, guys like Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers, Andrew Luck, Joe Flacco, who I assume is going to go to the Hall of Fame when Ray Lewis is inducted. So there you go. He's going to go as a visitor. So I think with those guys being shut down, I look at Brian Hoyer, and I might look at some other options this week. I might see if there's another streamable player that you could perhaps put in there. I know Marcus Mariota is one of the ones that comes to mind because he's playing the Cleveland Browns. The only problem is that Mariota is such a different quarterback at home. He's had 10 touchdowns and 11 interceptions in all of his career home games. And I'm like, what is going on? What does he not like about Nashville? Does he not like the music? Is it something else? Does he drive a Toyota instead of a Nissan? I don't know. I don't know what the deal is, but he just does not play well at home. And if you look at the Titans, you're like, this could be the game that the Titans lose, right? Like this is like if you figure the Browns are going to win one game this season, like the Titans just make the most sense for being the team that's going to lose to them. So I look at Mariota and I'm like, it seems right. I mean, I can talk myself into this, but I could also see DeMarco Murray running for 3 touchdowns, Mariota passing for 210 yards, no touchdowns and an interception, and be like, I'm not doing it. So if you're in that kind of instance, I would go back to Brian Hoyer. But if you can go pick somebody else up, like, I don't know that Derek Carr that's a terrible option. That's not a terrible option. That's a terrible example because he's probably already locked into somebody else's lineup. But perhaps Kirk Cousins or somebody like that. So I might take a look. I would have to see a roster. But if you have Brian Hoyer, just don't expect him to go out there and do what he's been doing over the last 3 weeks.
You're just lobbying for more tweets at you. That's what you're doing. You're saying, I have to see the individual roster. You just love everyone asking you all the questions, making you seem like you're the guy. I do have to ask you about 2 more Bears guys. I see it. Cameron Meredith was targeted 12 times last week, 130 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Alshon Jeffery, not a happy guy over there. He's been asking for the ball. He hasn't been getting it. So in week 6, who do you think gets the majority of the touches here for the Bears?
Yeah, Brian Hoyer just came out and was like, well, I'm not going to force him the ball, which led every, fantasy enthusiast to throw their, tablet or phone against the wall because they want Alshon Jeffery to be good. And I really think you talk about how unhappy he is, but I feel like it's mostly writers, like the Chicago Tribune is like, the Bears need to get him the ball. Or anybody else who's writing about the Bears are like, what are they doing? And I want to hear more from Alshon himself. I wish he was more vocal. I remember last year Sammy Watkins was dissatisfied with his role with the Bills, and he went to the press and was talking to everybody, and then the next thing you know, he's being targeted a ton by Tyrod Taylor. But he's being targeted a ton. But Alshon hasn't done that. I want him to be kind of the squeaky wheel that gets the targets. So I want him to do that, but he hasn't. So it still leads me to believe that Cameron Meredith and Eddie Royal and Zach Miller, those guys are going to be the ones that they're going to be passing to. And if you really look, and if you really think about it, I don't want to say that it's something sinister that the Bears do, but when the Bears are over a player, they're over him. I mean, you think of like some of the biggest names they've had in recent history with like Brian Urlacher, Lance Briggs, Devin Hester, Brandon Marshall, Matt Forte. When they were done with these guys, they were kind of like, all right, later. And now Alshon's in his contract year, and they're like, look, we got Cameron Meredith. I don't know what's going to happen with Kevin White, but we've done pretty well getting guys like Eddie Royal. Like, why are we going to pay this guy this much money? And they're looking at other options. So that conspiracy theory has played itself out over the course of the season so far. So until I finally hear Alshon either get super vocal about it or actually see Brian Hoyer start to go after him, I've got to have some hesitation to get him into my lineup.
We also, another guy that I have questions for, he's not on the Bears. We're moved past the Bears. We haven't seen much from Jamaal Charles yet. He had 2 carries in his season debut. Of course, he wasn't 100% then. He's come back a lot slower than people would have hoped, but he says now he's 110% and ready to take off the training wheels. So is he a safe bet to start in week 6? And then what does this mean if you own Spencer Ware?
Yeah, I think that you can finally get him back into the lineup. Coming off the bye week has given him an opportunity to truly get healthy. I wish he wouldn't have really tried to come back. I think with the bye week looming, he should have probably just shut it down for another week and then come back completely healthy. But even when he's there, I think that he's a viable option. I still believe Spencer Ware is also going to be a viable option because Jamaal Charles has never been a goal line back during the course of his career. Most of his touchdowns come from the big strike, from outside the 20, a dump off that he takes 40 yards for a touchdown. But when they get near the goal line, they're going to be looking to Spencer Ware to kind of hammer it in. And Spencer just kind of has his own role there, which makes him a viable flex option going forward. So I think both these guys are playable. I think we're seeing that with a lot of teams where they get 2 running backs who are productive, who can go out there and be starters for you, because there's not a lot of bell cow running backs in the NFL anymore, although there are some guys who are starting to get a ton of carries. And what's funny about that, I mean, Ezekiel Elliott's getting all those carries, and he's doing very well, and LeGarrette Blount's doing very well. But 2 guys, Todd Gurley and Lamar Miller, who are first-round draft. Todd was a first-round draft pick. Lamar Miller probably not so much, but a second-round guy. They're being bell cow in the terms of attempts, but they're not really turning that into fantasy production. So we're seeing situations with like Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman, like where you could start both of those guys. And I even fear that perhaps in Denver, which we will see playing the Chargers in San Diego on Thursday night, that perhaps C.J. Anderson and Devontae Booker could get to more of a split as well. So that's the way the NFL is starting to move. So I think with Spencer Ware and Jamaal Charles, you can probably play them both, although I really do like Spencer Ware a lot.
I know, he was the guy in week 1. You told us about him, so we credit that to you. Another guy that you told us last week who looks like he's on the rise here is Odell Beckham Jr. He had a season-high 12 targets and his first touchdown last week, which was really promising. But Eli Manning looks like he's having all sorts of problems over there in the Giants. So from what you saw in week 5, does Odell Beckham Jr., does he look like he's returning to himself, his top form?
Eli is miserable. Odell has looked fine the entire season. It's Eli and his inability to get on the ball. That's the thing that's the most troubling, is that Eli he targeted him 12 times. I would say about 4 of those passes were catchable, which is amazing because he ended up with 5 receptions. And Eli is just squandering perhaps the greatest the greatest triplets in the receiving corps this season, is having great guys like Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz and not being able to take advantage of them. And it's a terrible trend. And hopefully this week he can turn it around. Although the Ravens, they're a top 5 defense. I think they're number 4 against the pass and 3 against the run, or it's flipped. But they're a top 5 defense. But this is the thing about Eli, is that every time you're ready to write him off, every time that you think that, like, okay, we're done with Eli, he's awful, he's not good, that's when he really steps up. When he has a game like this where he's not supposed to do well, where you expect him to go out there and just completely fall apart like he always does, this is when he does well. So I'm confident that Odell Beckham Jr. is going to rebound for another touchdown this week. I think he'll have a pretty good game. This just seems like a big Eli game. And then when he has a favorable matchup against a team like the Browns or something, that's when he goes into the tank. Because he was bad. Like the Packers do not have a great pass defense, but all of a sudden they look like the '86 Bears against Eli last week. So I expect to bounce back because it makes absolute no sense. And I know that's not statistically, it's terrible. It's the wrong way you should approach things. But I think Eli has illustrated this enough over the course of his career.
Another superstar guy who we have a lot of questions about is Dez Bryant. He looks like he's on track to return this week against Green Bay. He's going to make the decision Friday, so we don't know for sure, but it is a possibility. And then the Cowboys have a bye week in Week 7, which will help Dez further recover, and it looks like Tony Romo will be their guy in Week 8, despite their 4-1 record with Dak Prescott, so that's a different topic entirely. But are we going to see Dez Bryant return to top form here?
I don't know that it's going to be this week, but again, I hope that he, with the bye week looming, that perhaps maybe take it easy. We've made our waiver wire pickups already. We've made our decisions. We're ready to go on and battle week 6 and 7 without him. So don't risk it. Play it cool. Play it safe. It's all right. It's a long season. The Cowboys are playing well as a team. Some of the other guys have stepped up. So it's really one of those things that get healthy and get back. And in week 8, he's really somebody who in the second half of the season could really be a huge boost to your roster because you've figured out ways of how to survive without him. And it could have been picking up somebody like Cameron Meredith or perhaps taking Sammy Coates or somebody like that and just surviving. So I really do believe in his talent. I believe that he's somebody you got to hold on to. And you talked about it at the top about some of the questions that I get a lot on Twitter, and people really want to know what to do with him. And I know some people even contemplate dropping him, but it's like you really got to look at like who you would be picking up at this point. Like if you're going to be dropping him for Justin Hardy, that makes absolutely no sense. So hold on to him. Realize it could just be a couple of more weeks before we finally go back to get Dez, who I thought was going to have a breakout season this year. And I still believe that he can. I mean, he's probably not going to get the season totals that everybody was hoping for, but certainly over the end of the season, and that's really when you want him to step up. But over the last half of the year, that's when you need him to pick it up. He could be this year's version of Sammy Watkins. So I say hang on, be patient, and hope that it all works out for the best.
Well, patience is a hard thing to ask of fantasy football owners, but we will try our best in Week 6 here. Survivor picks. Colin Kaepernick is starting for the 49ers on Sunday when they take on the Bills. In my opinion, this is a survivor pick of the week. I think the Bills are going to destroy them, but I'm already out of my Survivor League, so my opinion doesn't really matter at this point. I know. Is this the pick that you would have in the Survivor League?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit earlier with the Titans-Browns matchup. Just seems a little too good to be true, like type of thing. And you're trying to fit, because I know a lot of people have just taken that strategy of like I'm just taking the Titans, or excuse me, I'm just going against the Browns each and every week. That'd be great. Go against the Broncos every week. See what happens. Yeah, you would want to go with the Bills because they made a change. They've also done the thing too. They're that West Coast team that's flying across the country to go play on the East Coast. Even though the Bills were just on the West Coast as well, playing the LA Rams and beating them, I still think that's a pretty good pick. That's pretty much what I was thinking as well, even though I'm a little bit more excited to see Colin Kaepernick. I know it's one of those things that you've waited a long time for it to happen. Like when you thought of Chip Kelly's offense and how it would work in the NFL, one of the quarterbacks that always comes to mind or comes up in the discussion is Colin Kaepernick. Like this is the guy. Like this should be perfect. Like this is who exactly you want. It's a great pickup, and I'm excited to see it. But for Survivor, for a quarterback making his first start here in Week 6, I think that's a great pick. I would definitely go with the Bills.
Okay, well, any other final tips and tricks to keep in mind for Week 6? This has all been good stuff, but any other final nugget?
I know a lot of people have been wondering about Matt Ryan this week, and really he proved a lot last week going against Denver, in Denver, and being able to conquer them and do some nice things. And, looking at with Jameis Winston out, looking at Brian Hoyer having a tough matchup, I think Matt Ryan has done enough to kind of earn our trust a little bit and kind of perhaps, be somebody to continue to go with, because you never want to get into that situation where you're chasing fantasy points each and every week. And sometimes when you get a good quarterback, you just want to stick with them. You don't want to have too many decisions. I almost made that mistake with one league with Matthew Stafford, wavering on whether to pick him up whether to play him last week or not. But sometimes quarterbacks with tough matchups still find a way to get over. So I would stay comfortable with him and roll with him. And also, if you need a tight end stream this week, Lance Kendricks is somebody that I'm advocating. And also keep an eye on what's going on in Detroit. Dwayne Washington hasn't been practicing. Theo Riddick's also got an ankle injury that he's dealing with, which is why they brought in Justin Forsett. So make sure you keep an eye on that. And otherwise, I hate to do this. I don't like to promote my Twitter handle. But you can also hit me up on Twitter, and I will try to do my best to answer your questions.
All right, there it is.
I mean, it's not easy because the Rogue One trailer came out on Thursday, so that's actually occupied a bunch of my time.
A football guy, but also a Star Wars guy as well. We can appreciate it.
I know, it seems weird, right? Like, what a dork, but it's true.
A jack of all trades, we like it. Well, my last question for you is, when can we watch your show, Fantasy and Friends?
Oh, that's so nice of you to ask. Well, we will be back on the air Friday evening, 6 p.m. there on the East Coast. Once again, we ask you to DVR the show. You can watch it live. You're more than welcome to watch it live. I understand that NESN has some wonderful programming, so I would never want to take away viewers and eyes from what's going on there. But if you do have, some time you want to watch it, we really do appreciate it. If you want to get involved in the show, you can actually call in. We have a number, 888-55-FRIENDS. You can call in starting at 6 p.m. on Friday night, and or tweet us or do whatever, and we'll try to get you all involved, and then we'll be back on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We're off Thursday because I'm lazy. No, we have the football games, but that's it. So check us out, 6 p.m.
Killing it. Well, thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you this week and hearing from you next week. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. Appreciate it.